Hey everyone, welcome back to Alfred's Basic Adult Piano Course, Lesson Book Level 1. This video is Lesson 57, covering page 64 in the book, more about chords. So you've been playing chords for a while now, and if you remember, a chord is 3 or more notes. Now, just be careful that it's not 2 or more notes. Sometimes people see 2 notes that are played at the same time and just think that's a chord. Technically, it's not a chord. You need 3 or more notes. If you've got 2 notes played at the same time, it's pretty much just a harmony. A harmony is 2 or more notes together at the same time. And a chord can be 3 notes, 4 notes, 5 notes. Chords can get rather large. But today on page 64, we're going to focus on specifically triads. A triad is a 3-note chord. So just remember the prefix tri. Tri means 3. So again, triad, 3-note chord. So there at the top of the page, we're talking about the 3 individual notes that make up a triad. And on the piano, I'm going to actually use C major with my right hand, middle C position right here, as we go through and name each of these notes. So your first note, the bottom note of the chord I'm playing right now, is considered the root note. So if it's a C chord, C is the root. And that's true of any chord. It says actually below, it says the root is the note from which the triad gets its name. So it's pretty easy. A D chord, your root note would be D. An A chord, your root note would be A. So again, I've got a C chord, my root note is C. It's also called the first, and you see in the little pink box there where it says root, it also has a number 1 under it. Now most people just say the root. Think about the C major scale, which we did a few lessons ago. In the C major scale, what is your first note? It's C. Okay, so also the first note of your scale is also the first note of the chord, if you're talking about a C major scale and a C major chord. All right, so the third note is the middle note of the triad, right here. In this case, it's E. The reason it's called the third is, well, there's various reasons it's called the third. Any of these work. You can think about intervals. Okay, intervals we had earlier in the book. If I start on C and I go up a third, right? Remember how intervals work? 1 is the name of the note you start on, 2, and then 3. So it's a third up from C if you want to look at it that way. It's also the third note of the scale. Again, I'm dealing with a C major chord. I'm going to think about my C major scale. 1, 2, 3. It's the third note of the scale. So there's a couple reasons why this is the third. And then you've got your fifth. In this case, it's G. And really the same rules as the third. You can look at it as 5 notes up from C. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The same thing as the C scale. It's the 5th note of the C scale. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you've got your root, which is the first, your third, and the 5th. And those are the 3 notes that make up a triad. And that will apply to, any key, any scale, any chord. That's the same chord name as the scale name. Now, in the key of C, we don't have any sharps or flats. More about that later. But when you have sharps and flats in some keys, like D, for example, then your third is actually going to be a black key, F sharp. I won't get into that today. But another good example we could go off of is F. The key of F only has a B flat. But an F chord is just F, A, and C. So F is the name of the chord. It's also the root note. It's also the first note in the F scale. The third is A. That's the third note of the scale. And the 5th is C. So this rule will apply for any scale and any chord of the same name. But keep in mind, most scales and chords are going to be dealing with some sharps and flats in there. So it does get a little trickier. But I'm going to stick with C major for now. So again, talking about the root, there on page 64, the root is the name from which the triad gets its name. Now that root can actually be put anywhere on the piano. I think this page doesn't really even get into this, but I'll go ahead and say this. If I play E, G, and I put the C up here, it's still a C chord. You know, it's still those three notes, C, E, and G. But I flipped the C up here. This is called an inversion. And I think you've actually played a few inversions, but again, we won't get too much into this. But I do want to point out that just because the C isn't the first note of the chord, isn't the first note of the chord, it's not here anymore, it's still the root. Okay, that doesn't change, and it's really important that we understand and know that. This is still a C chord because it's C, E, and G, but it doesn't have to have the C at the bottom. It can be anywhere on the piano and still be a C chord, but more importantly, the C is still the root, and the E is actually still the third, and the G is still the fifth. So root position is what this is called when you have the root at the bottom. And it's the easiest way to see how a triad works, because there's your root, your third, and your fifth. But if I start flipping these notes around, it becomes a little more difficult to see that, but it's still root, third, and fifth. The root doesn't change. Think about a plant. Where is that root? That root is normally in the ground, right? It's underneath the rest of the plant. But if I pull that plant out of the ground and flip that root upside down, it's still the root, right? It didn't change, okay? So that's what we're doing here when you play these chords in different positions. So the C, in this case, of a C chord is still the root. The C will always be the root. Just like in a D chord, the D is always the root. All right. Further down the page, it said triads in root position, which we just talked about with root at the bottom. So I'm going to put my C back there at the bottom. Always look like this. So this, what I'm showing you down here is how it looks like on the piano. But in the book, they're going to show you what it looks like on the staff. So remember, the staff is made up of lines and spaces. Well, visually, it's pretty cool. Root position is always going to look like a line, line, and line, or a space, space, and space. So whenever you see three notes on the staff, whether it's treble clef staff or the bass clef staff, you see these three notes. They're written vertically, and they're all touching, and they're all either on lines or they're on spaces, then you can guarantee it's a triad. In root position, if you see a gap between, just like you would on the piano, notice when I played this inversion earlier and I put the C up here, there's a gap on the keyboard. I've skipped two keys now. See, in root position, I've just skipped one key here and one key here. And those, if these are actually line notes, by the way. C, E, and G, if you remember, in treble clef are line notes. I've skipped the two spaces, the D and the F. So if you look in the middle of page 64, pretend that root note is middle C, and the third is E, and the fifth is G. Those were line notes, okay? And that's what it would look like. Let me go here. Now this is called a D minor triad. We're not going to get into why it's a minor, but D is a space note, F is a space note, and A is a space note. So if you look there on the right where it shows space notes lined up, this would be an example of that. So again, anytime you see three notes that are stacked vertically and they're all line notes or they're all space notes, it is a triad. If there's a gap in between them on the page, there's also going to be a gap, for example. This is just one of many examples on the piano as well. And it won't be root position. We're going to focus just on root position triads now, built on the C major scale. So, midway down in the book. And it says there in pink, triads may be built on any note of any scale. So we're focusing on C major today. Remember our C major scale in the treble clef, the right hand, as a review, is C, D, E, and your fingering you're going to cross over thumb to F, F, G, A, B, C. Now the rule for building a triad, Take your first note. Let's say it's a C triad. We're going to start on C. Your next note is up a third. So 1, 2, 3. And your next note is a fifth above C. Or go up another third from E. 1, 2, 3. Now that rule that I just spelled out for you applies to starting on any key on the piano as long as they're white keys. We're strictly in the key of C right now. In C major, when we did the scale, that's all white keys. Okay, and that encompasses the entire piano. Because if I kept playing, I'm just repeating the scale over and over and over. So that's how you build triads. Start on a note, go up 3 notes, go up another 3 for your root, your third, and your fifth. So this C chord is the first chord that you're going to play there in the treble clef example where it says play with your right hand underneath triads built on the C major scale. The next chord is built off of D, the second note of the scale. You've got D, you've got F, and you've got A. And then the next one is E, and then F, and then G, and then A, and then B, and then the last one, you're back to C 1 octave higher. Now here's a tip that will help play this a lot easier. Because it's the same position starting on every note and they're all white keys, it's the same fingering. I've talked before about locked hand position. If I keep my thumb, my third finger, and my fifth finger locked, but not tense, don't tighten up. When I say locked, you still need to be relaxed and loose. When I lift my hand, I'm going to follow my thumb to D, the next chord. If I don't move any of my other fingers, that third finger falls on F, that fifth finger falls on A, because it's the same spacing, the same layout. When I go to E, I'll do the same thing. So basically I'm going to follow my follow my thumb up to the next chord, this one's F, and keep going up to G and A, and I don't move any fingers on my hand. I can't miss any of the notes. But if I jump up and I expand my hand and I'm not careful, I could hit some other note, some other chord. But this is a little trick where you can end up hitting all the right notes and just follow one finger up. In this case, I would follow the thumb because it's pushing the entire hand up. You can actually really use this to your advantage when you jump. Let's say I'm on the C chord and I want to jump up to the F chord. Keep it locked, follow your thumb to F, and you should be able to land on the other 2 notes successfully. Come back down, you can do the same thing. But it takes practice, easier said than done. It makes complete sense, right? But it's a physical practice as well. So you may jump up and you may accidentally contract your hand and lose your spot, and then gotta study it all over again. Okay, first, third, and fifth. So the rule will get you wherever you need to go, but the rule will slow you down. So practice, right? Practice, and eventually you can jump around to all these chords. And that little tip about keeping that locked hand position can give you a bit of an advantage. Same thing in the left hand. So bass clef. Everything's just reversed with the fingering because it's left hand. So instead of your thumb, which in the right hand was leading your hand up the piano, it's going to be your fifth finger. So I'm starting here on C. If I follow my pinky up to D, keep my locked hand position, I should be able to get, in this case, F with my third finger, A with my thumb, and continue up. There's E, F, G, A, B, C. Okay, so you're playing the exact same thing in both hands, and if you want, you could actually take this to another level by actually going through and playing this in both hands. It would give you a great advantage, actually, early on here. And I'm just going nice and slow. But notice I'm not trying to move one hand and then the other. Now you can do that, but you want to try to move both hands at the same time. And that's really what it's about in the end. You want to really practice moving them at the same time. Okay, and then you can go all the way up, and you can mix it up. You can come back down even. And like I said, you can skip around. You can call out a chord, A, down to D, really practice jumps. So you can do a lot more than this page and really get ahead of the game. Last at the bottom, when you name the notes of any triad in root position, you will always skip one letter of the musical alphabet between each note. The triads you played above are, so they spelled it out there, C, E, and G. So this is what we were saying earlier, going back to C chord here. I was talking about, you know, first and third and fifth, and how you're skipping the, if it's a C chord, C, E, and G, you're skipping D and F. You're skipping letters of the alphabet. You're skipping numbers. You're skipping, you know, the second note of the scale, the fourth note of the scale. You're also skipping fingers. Notice for all these chords in both hands, we never use the second or fourth finger. Does that mean you'll never use those fingers on these chords ever? No. You will get to the point someday where you're going to be playing these chords with all kinds of fingering. But if someone says, you know, just play me a straight out triad, the most basic common fingering, most comfortable, is 1-3-5 in the right hand, or, you know, 5-3-1 in the left hand. But when you get to complicated music someday, and there's other chords and other notes, you may find yourself having to really use some other fingering, which we'll get to someday. But if you're just playing a series of triads, basic triads, that's the fingering to use. And then, of course, at the bottom it says, this is the complete triad vocabulary. It should be memorized. And I remind you again, this is strictly in the key of C major. Once we get into other keys, it's going to get a little more complicated because of key signatures, flats and sharps. We'll get more into that later. You've played in some keys with, I think, some flats and sharps already. But we haven't gotten to those scales yet. We will soon, though. But it's still a basic, it's a very similar concept, like I said earlier with the F chord as example. The first 5 notes of an F scale are F, G, A, there is a B flat, and C. That's a 4th note, so it won't affect the triad. The triad is F, 3rd note is A, 5th note is C. So this is a good example of one that's just like a C major. And actually, you're playing an F chord in the key of C major. If you look there on the page, it's the 4th note, 4th chord. C, D, E, and there's your F chord. So it's the 4th chord in the key of C. It's the 1st chord in the key of F. More on that later. All right, so page 64. More about chords, specifically the triad, specifically in the key of C major. Do practice this. Of course, the more you practice, the better. And like I said, if you take it a step further by playing it not only up the piano, but down, and maybe jumping around with that locked hand position, that much better you'll be. And this prepares you, of course, for page 65, the song Cockles and Mussels. The left hand is going to be going through a series of these chords that you played on page 64, while your right hand plays a melody. So we'll look into that in lesson 58, and I look forward to seeing you there.